Hello again, Dr. Bruce McNab here, One Health Epidemiologist. Um, this is February the 10th, 2022, another video on COVID and the movement of organisms through populations. I produced a number of videos in the spring of 2020 talking about how COVID spreads through populations and what we need to do to slow that down. Now, 2022, we've got vaccines, a lot of people vaccinated, a lot of people, including me, really tired of distancing and not seeing friends and not having people over for dinner and not being able to meet in the pub. Um, and we have a lot of demonstrations of people very frustrated about those things. Specifically the so-called trucker demonstrations now. So I thought I'd make another video and review some stuff. The first one being that virus spread depends entirely on physics, chemistry, and biology. Sorry, but the virus just doesn't care about your rights to gather and freedoms and all that stuff. It only pays attention to physics in terms of the shape of the bug and how it cascades and the chemistry and whether it forms aerosols or attaches only to droplets or how it attaches to surfaces including countertops and surfaces of your respiratory system or your GI tract, whichever. And then biochemistry or molecular biology of how well they fit and attach to things on shapes of your cells, and if that's sufficient to let them really attach and essentially insert their genetic material into your cells, so they then borrow the machinery of your cells to reproduce themselves, produce the proteins that they are made of, that surround their genetic material, and create so many copies of themselves they basically burst that cell and then release, zillions of, a lot of virion particles out of that cell, which then goes into your bloodstream and all over and to reinfect other cells and then amplify greatly at a huge exponential rate. Including then being able for you to breathe out, sneeze out, or depending on if it's a virus of the digestive tract, poop out. That's how they spread. So the only way to slow them down is by addressing them biologically and physically. So that's why distancing helps. It's no fun, but it helps reduce the probability of spread. Masking helps. It's not 100%, but it helps reduce the probability of spread. Minimizing the time you're exposed to areas that might have aerosol reduces the probability of spread. Having immunity against it reduces the probability of it being able to attach on your surfaces and being able to reproduce and grow, or even if it does grow some, antibodies slow them down. And even if the shape isn't perfect, it's a shape similar to what the immune system has seen before, either through an earlier version of that influenza virus that is now slightly different, but there's some cross protection and you had that earlier version before, or you were vaccinated and stimulated the immune system to that shape of bug or one similar to it, or in the case of earlier versions of COVID, vaccines have been made designed to hold down or attach to those specific shapes, and then Omicron came along and has some like 35 mutations, meaning 35 changes to its genetic material, which produce surface proteins with different shapes that the immune system has not seen before, either through natural infection of earlier versions of coronavirus or vaccination, or they partially fit, and the antibodies from those earlier infections, including colds caused by COVID years before the 2019, 2020, when this more dangerous COVID came along, you get some cross protection, And because the entire system is exponential, that if a person is infected and then goes on to infect two more people, and then they each go on to infect two more people, creating 4 new cases in that next round, and then they each go on to produce 2 more, that's 8 in the next round. That's the whole system, because it's multiplying together, not adding, but multiplying itself. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is a lot more than 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. So that's why it expands so rapidly. That's why we call it exponential growth. That's why when it started in China, within a few months, it exploded exponentially around the globe, exponential increase in the number of cases. And because we have so much travel now, people flying all over the place, compared to, say, 1918, we had a lot of travel with people coming back from First World War and stuff, but not nearly the same amount of rapid travel as we do now with jets and stuff. It spreads very quickly. And we only have physical and biological tools to slow it down. And yes, they're really expensive. And they're not fun at all. Distancing, not meeting in large groups, it basically eliminates or drastically reduces all the fun things we do. And it's understandable that everybody's really frustrated. And you just look for yourself. When the new bug came along with a new shape, because it has a new shape, there wasn't immunity against it. It has a competitive advantage. It took off in early 2020. That's completely understood. When we reduced interactions by by distancing, masking, staying out of small places, minimizing the time we're with groups of other people, the numbers went down exponentially. And then when we started meeting again, reopening schools, and even though children don't, it's not as pathogenic to children and cause as many deaths in children, they still spread it. You've picked up colds from your kids basically every fall that they got at school, and they just had a runny nose for a few days and hardly slowed down at all, and you're dragging your butt around for a week after that, thanks to the cold your kid gave you. But anyway, that's how it works. You don't need a degree in medicine to understand that. So you saw the numbers go back up when we had more interaction, and then go back down when we decreased interaction, and go back down when we had vaccines and more people got vaccinated. And then when we got another new bug with another new shape to which immune systems were not greatly adapted, it took off again, Omicron. But there's some cross protection to it, and it slows it down. It doesn't work nearly as well on Omicron at the virus vaccines, and your natural immunity, if you're exposed to the real bug before, doesn't work as well on Omicron. And that's precisely why it accelerated, took off. I mean, there are thousands of other mutations, or hundreds of thousands of other mutations have occurred to all viruses in the last 2 years, including the coronaviruses, but because you had immunity, some cross immunity to those new shapes, because they were similar to the earlier versions of COVID we saw and vaccines, they couldn't take off. They didn't take off because you had immunity to them, either through natural exposure or exposure to vaccines. But Omicron's different and doesn't get slowed down as much. I don't know, a possible analogy for antibodies is a police dog. They'll run after the bad guy and hang on to his pant leg and hold him down, so the police, equivalent to the white blood cells, can catch up to them, grab them, and take them away in the paddy wagon, which is equivalent to kind of a macrophage cell that literally eats stuff like that and takes it away, usually to the liver. That's quite analogous. But the antibodies we had from the earlier versions of COVID and the vaccines were kind of police dogs with only one tooth, and they couldn't hold on as well. So they slowed them down some, but not as much as the better fitting antibodies. So that's well understood, and you have to realize that viruses only pay attention to physics, chemistry, and biology. They don't say, oh, I'm not going to infect this guy because it's in his Charter of Rights to have freedom of association. They don't say, oh, this is going to cause a lot of economic harm, so I won't bother to infect here. You can't, I know you're frustrated about all those things, but you can't use those things to slow down the virus. We have to address the biology. And yes, that's bloody expensive and really painful. So then you look at things like maximizing marginal return on investment. There's a business and economics principle that, you want to get the biggest bang for the buck, basically. And vaccination is that. Vaccination maximizes the marginal return on investment in terms of having the greatest impact for the lowest price of slowing things down compared to, not letting people eat in restaurants. And remember, the piece of paper, whether there's a piece of paper signed off by some official somewhere saying you can't eat in a restaurant, is irrelevant. What matters is whether or not you meet people. It doesn't matter why you do or do not meet people. If you voluntarily don't go to a restaurant because you don't want to get sick yourself and you don't want to contribute to the exponential spread of it, that still hurts the restaurant's bottom line, okay? Or if you don't go because they're closed or reduced capacity through somebody wrote something on a piece of paper, either way, it slows down the spread. So, and either way, it hurts the restaurant's bottom line, okay? So we need to keep that in mind, and we have to find a balance. And that gets into the very touchy subject of basically what's the cost of a life, or what's the cost of illness, and actually there are different opinions on that, and actually that's kind of a touchy subject among people. I mean, I come from the veterinary side of things. It's much easier. And in my PhD in epidemiology, I did a minor in economics. The International Association for Veterinary Epidemiology is actually called the International Society of Veterinary Epidemiology and Economics, because veterinary epidemiologists, and for that matter, public health epidemiologists, fully understand when diseases go through populations, it has a huge impact on economics. In agricultural animals, a huge impact on the efficiency of production. It has an economic impact. So we need to balance and understand economics when we're trying to manage health systems. As part of my coursework in my PhD that I did at the University of Guelph in Canada, I took a course at McMaster Medical School, university just down the road here, called Benefit Cost Analysis of Health Management Systems. And it was a graduate studies level course, and my minor was in economics, production economics, and I took that course at McMaster as part of it, in addition to other courses in economics. Interesting, there's about 13 students in the class, half of them, 6 of them were MDs, medical doctors, who were going into public health that needed to understand economics and management, benefit cost analysis of health management systems. Another 6 were MBAs who wanted to go in to manage the businesses of health systems and wanted to marry management of health with economics. And then I was the only veterinarian in the course wanting to do it. So it was much easier for me because if you want to know the price of a cow, you look at the market and see how much it costs to buy a cow. On the human side, they tend to measure things in terms of things called quality adjusted life years. How many life years did that disease cost? So say life expectancy is 75 years, just to keep the numbers simple. So say a person of age 73 dies of COVID when otherwise they were going to die at age 75 of influenza or whatever. So you could argue that COVID case costs 2 quality adjusted life years, okay? Whereas if a child of 5 dies of whatever, or say COVID, then their expected life is 75, so that cost 70 life years. And that's why when a child dies, it's so tragic. It's that lost opportunity of life years. That's the cost, and it's sort of a more palatable way of discussing the cost or the value of life versus in dollars, even though we convert that to dollars all the time. We wait till there's a certain number of car accidents at an intersection before we pay the millions of dollars to put in a clover leaf at that intersection or improve that intersection. We have life insurance, which puts a dollar value basically on life. So we do it, but it's not very. So yeah, it's expensive to fight new diseases, but the only tools you have are biology and chemistry. So we have to find that balance somehow. And yes, it's very frustrating, but we need to apply logic too. As I said, optimizing the marginal return on investment, getting the biggest bang for the buck, is getting vaccinated. So why are you, resisting getting why are people resisting getting vaccinated? Because they're worried about they're complaining about how the high cost of COVID, when that's the most cost-effective thing they can do. That it doesn't follow. There's a thing called relative risk. Everything has risk. Driving is risky. You can be in an accident, but you also know driving during a snowstorm or an ice storm has a higher risk. So you need to look at the relative risk. It's not that there's zero risk versus very high risk. It's that there's mild or moderate risk driving on a sunny day with clear visibility compared to driving after an ice storm in the fog. That's why you tend to, today's sunny, I'll go into the office. There's been an ice storm and it's foggy. I think I'll work from home or phone or Zoom into the office, because the relative risk of being in a car accident when it's icy and foggy relative to the normal risk of getting a car accident is high. So yeah, vaccines can have side effects. And, there's an extremely small proportion of people vaccinated with, I've forgotten the name of the vaccine, sorry, get blood clots, okay? But so yeah, the risk is not zero, but the risk of getting blood clots and dying from COVID is far, far, far higher than the risk of getting it from that vaccine. So the relative risk is huge. So it's not logical to not get vaccinated. So those are some of the things you need to think about. Another one, all these protests. I know I'm going to regret getting into kind of politics, but I want to live, and I suspect the vast majority of people want to live in a country where you're free to disagree with anything, and you're free to write any member of parliament, federal, provincial, municipal, whatever, or state, expressing your disagreement, and media to express your disagreement with that for whatever reason. And I want to be able to demonstrate physically to drive home my point how much I disagree with this, whether it's me walking alone with a sign saying that, or a whole bunch of people walking together with signs saying that. Sure, I want to be able to do that, including disrupting local traffic and local business and local sleep or whatever by parking big hunks of metal that are on wheels to disrupt traffic for a day or two. But then you've made your point. Personally, I think it's unnecessary and does unreasonable harm to others to extend it past that. I want to be free to do anything I want, provided it doesn't hurt somebody else. If you want to take up rock climbing, fine. That's risky. You accept that risk, or riskier than not rock climbing. So you accept that risk, do rock climbing. But if you fall, only you get hurt, and you accepted that risk. So fine, do that. If you like fast cars and racing with other people, then you and your car buddies, rent time at a track and race all you want, because everyone on the track agreed to take that risk. And if they're in an accident, well, they agreed to take that risk, so fine. But street racing is a different thing, because when those same guys are street racing, they're putting other people at risk who didn't agree to take on that risk. So you may decide to take on the risk of COVID and say, I'm willing to get sick. I'm young and healthy. I don't think it'll make me that sick, so I'm not going to get vaccinated. Okay, but even if you don't get sick, you can spread it to others. And worse still, the spread is exponential. If the street racer runs into injures one person and kills the other, okay, that's tragic, but only 2 people are hurt. If you get COVID because you didn't get vaccinated, and you didn't get that sick, but you spread it to 2 other people, and they did it and not get terribly sick, and they spread it to 2 more people each, 4 people, and then they spread it to 8 more people after that. So you have a total of 8 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1 people who got it. It doesn't take long until somebody in there gets very sick and dies. And they didn't agree to take on that risk. That's the same as a street racer injuring one and killing another person, and then 10 days later, 4 more people dropped dead from trauma when they didn't agree to street race and they weren't even there. And then the next week, 8 more people dropped dead of trauma when they weren't hit. They didn't street race. So you could argue, you're putting people at risk exponentially. It's even worse, in my view, because it's exponential, than street racing. And I certainly don't condone street racing. So you really got to think about the exponential spread you are contributing to by your choices of not masking or not, distancing or not getting vaccinated or whatever. That's not to say those things aren't painful or you don't necessarily want to do them, but you have the potential to cause exponential harm, that high potential to cause exponential harm. So you really want to think about that. What else was I going to say? Even if, I really have a hard time, people, I'm going to get into trouble for this, too political, but I'm no fan of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Personally, I think it's more likely that COVID originated from animals and was spread from animals to people through the wet markets of China, where people buy, in my view, crazy things to eat. But still, even if you firmly believe or whatever that this bug escaped from the lab in Wuhan, or worse, was deliberately spread from the lab in Wuhan, that doesn't change how we address it here. When you see a fire starting in your house, you don't sit down and discuss, did that start from an electrical or a match or a cigarette butt, and while your curtains and ceiling are catching on fire. No, you run for the fire extinguisher. So once COVID got to wherever you are, your country, you address that then. It doesn't matter where it came from or started then. I mean, it matters, and you want to try to prevent that in the future, but it doesn't change what you do there. And in fact, even if you think the CCP accidentally or deliberately released this, and you're angry, but then you're saying you're not going to get vaccinated, and you're tired of all these regulations. Well, if they did that, I'm not saying they did, but if they did that, surely it was to cause chaos, disruption, and have people die. So by not getting vaccinated and whatever, you're aiding and abetting their objective. Why would you do that? I'm not saying that's true, but I've met people who sort of take that view, and to my mind are helping the very people they're mad at. So I don't get that at all. I just don't. But anyway, and then experts. Anybody who spends a lot of time studying something gets to know a lot about it. So if I'd spent all the time I spent in veterinary medicine and epidemiology and economics, in something else, truck driving or farming or manufacturing or engineering or whatever, then I know a lot about that. But didn't do that, so I don't know about that stuff. But I do know a fair amount about the stuff I did study. And anyone else who happened to study something else, if they put that much energy into studying biology and virology and immunology and epidemiology, they know a lot more about that too. Um, so it's not that being elitist, it's just why wouldn't you listen to those people or at least consider their suggestions um, when they've spent all that time studying it? They come to you to ask you about stuff you studied about. Um, when you get on an airplane, do you insist on a 5 hour lecture on from the pilot on aerodynamics and jet engine propulsion before you agree? Oh, okay, I'll go on this plane. No, you kind of assume those guys know what they're doing and get on the plane. And yeah, planes crash, engines fail, but that's what. And if the captain comes on and says before you take off, you're still sitting ready to depart, and they start up the engines, and the captain comes on and says there's a warning light on here in the cockpit, so we're going to shut down, have service come out and look at it. We're sure it's nothing, but protocol says we have to, and to be on the safe side, we want the service people to come out and take a look at it. Like you wouldn't jump up on the airplane and say, I got this. I read on the internet if you put bleach and ivermectin in the gas tank, it'll fix the plane and we can get this baby in the air. I mean you wouldn't do that. So why do you think you know about that stuff when you haven't studied it? Why wouldn't you listen to the people who have studied it? But anyway, those are just some thoughts. We still have to address the biology. Pandemics have happened since the beginning of forever, since there have been animals on the planet, and they will continue to happen. It'll happen again. It happened 2 years apart with the first coronavirus and then Omicron. So it'll happen again. I don't know when it'll happen again, but it will. So we should maybe think about trying to reduce the damage of that in a balanced way. And yes, everyone's disappointed that Omicron came along. If it hadn't come along, we probably would be almost back to normal by now, or reasonable normal. But it did, and we're getting very, very close to, assuming another one doesn't come along, to being able to ease up on stuff. When we do, the numbers will go back up, but hopefully they won't go up as much as they did in the past, and more and more people will get vaccinated. I suspect there'll be a new or modified vaccine out fairly shortly that fits Omicron better, but that's how it will likely go. I encourage you to look at the series of videos I made in the spring of 2020. If you go into YouTube and search on my name, Dr. W. Bruce McNab, MCNAB, and COVID or something, you'll find a lot of them. There's one in particular, even if you already watched it, I encourage you to watch it again. It's Factors Affecting Spread of Disease. If you go in, again, to YouTube and say, Bruce McNab, MCNAB, Factors Affecting Disease Spread, you should find it. And even if you watched it before, I think it'll mean a lot more to you now that you've experienced COVID for a couple of years. Now, I don't mean this as an I told you so, but I mean it to illustrate people who study this stuff have known and understood this stuff for like 70 years or more. Okay, and so you might want to consider that. And everything is played out exactly as completely logically. A new shape of bug we're not immune to takes off. Apply physics and chemistry to it, distancing and everything, it goes down. Apply more immunity through vaccination, it goes down. uh, interact more, it goes back up. Like it's not complicated. It's just that it's exponential. It's very dangerous, and not, we don't see it all that often, but we do see it. And most people, I think in terms of health at the individual person level. My own health, or the health of the individuals around me, my family, loved ones, close friends. Generally, people often don't think in terms of health at the population level. So I can understand that being a bit confusing. But it doesn't make it, just because it's confusing and you haven't thought of it that way before, doesn't make it false. It's still true. That's the way it behaves. So I hope that helps and encourages those of you who haven't got vaccinated to get vaccinated. Those of you who are really frustrated, and I understand that with all the reduced interaction, that you hang in there for a while longer. To me, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and provided another new shape doesn't come along too soon. Cheer up, it'll happen again, maybe in your lifetime, maybe not. And we know what to do about it. We just have to work together to do it. That's all for now. Bye now.